Okay, welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to be back with another episode of the Perception Action Journal Club. My great pleasure to be joined today by Ryan Crotin from armcare.com. I've known Ryan for quite a few years.
Mhm.
We had lots of interactions, and today we're gonna talk again about this constant recurring problem, a nightmare of arm injuries in baseball pitchers. And Ryan's has a whole company, a whole program he's developed into kind of addressing this problem and injury prevention and reducing injury susceptibility. So thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to your audience. I know it's pretty vast.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And so let's maybe do can you, this is the first time I've had you on. So can you give us a little bit about your background, a little introduction
Yeah,
for people?
I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. But I had gone to school forever, so 16 years. Had to write 2 competency exams. So I'm a dual PhD. One's in exercise physiology, the other's in biomechanics. Did that at the University of Buffalo, studying pitching fatigue mechanisms. So I looked at internal responses to simulated games, and then also what are the mechanical concepts that are in association? What kind of movement variability do we see when a player is fatigued? And then from there, I did 10 years of Major League Baseball. And I had a little break where I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Penn Medicine. And that's where I got really interested in matching functional strength and movement together, and really, put forth an effort to create a different type of training called strength and coordination training. So it involves both movement and maxes. And from the Angels, I developed a consulting firm called RC13 Sports, where primarily we focus on injured MLB players and college athletes, and now getting into amateurs through remote methods. But I had been communicating with armcare.com. When I was at the Angels, we were the worst in the league in 17 and 18. We had the most injuries, the most surgeries, and we used a whole bunch of different approaches to solving this problem. We were expanding range of motion. We thought that guys who were tight, were more at risk for injury. We actually made it worse. And then the next year, we hired a rocket scientist. We had a legitimate rocket scientist at the Angels that created,
Wow.
we created a biomechanical model that was very robust, based on thousands of athletes, and looking at their transition from draft age to their major league stardom. And we realized that our biomechanical model also contributed to even worse injuries because we were changing so much in a pitcher's natural delivery to
Okay.
fit
You were
a
trying to fit
normalized
in.
concept, right?
Mhm.
So then I got put in this position called the director of performance integration. I was in the middle of everything:
Mhm.
player development, scouting, sports medicine, sports science, strength and conditioning, kind of keeping the glue all together, making sure that we drafted players that had the right longitudinal features, looking at habits, looking at these things. And then I got really into the dynamometry piece, the force testing tools, because it brought me back to my postdoc.
Right.
And I said, okay, we got to look at the strength piece. Started making individualized programs. We determined fatigue levels in pitchers, and we knew when we could go back to back with them, based on the recovery of their arm strength. And then lo and behold, we cut all our injury list days in half across the organization. We averaged 11 surgeries a year, brought it down to 6, and we had 0 surgeries for 19 and 20 for our active roster.
Wow.
With the Angels, we had nobody, no one who was on the field requiring surgery. We kind of sucked on the mound anyway, but we were
Kept them
healthy.
healthy. Yeah.
Yep. And then during our whole front office got let go, and during that period, I started consulting for armcare.com, because looking at 2 different reports in MLB, you have your injured report, which is very, very reactive. It's like you can't do anything with the guy anymore.
Yeah.
But there's this other report called the treatment report that nobody looks at. That's where all the trainers, all the physical therapists, they have to put notes in where you can determine what is the inflammatory state of that athlete before there's a problem. And what we realized is our injuries were happening on the road. So I got interested in armcare.com because we could not. All these conservative injuries are happening on the road because we weren't testing. We couldn't take our big units that could test everything on the road. So this was a solution, to be able to say it's portable, it puts it in the player's bag. We can get a couple of team, we can test everybody, and the player does it on their own because the staff is getting worn out. And then communicating with Armcare, it just made sense. There's just such differing philosophies. At the time, the Angels didn't want to do any more strength testing with the new front office, that I had this avenue to help further this technology and build education. And so I joined them. So, that's kind of where I am with this company.
Yeah. So step back, I guess your answer to, what's causing arm injuries, and it's not, throwing fast, throwing too much. So it's not developing this functional arm strength. Is that what you?
Yeah.
Not preparing the arm to handle these loads.
I put polls out, and I spoke at the ABCA conference, and I was showing videos, and I was showing pictures side by side, like comparing Shohei Ohtani to Jared Weaver. And if people haven't seen Jared Weaver pitch, he was at the Angels. He steps completely cross body. So he goes all the way in, almost, towards the on deck circle for where the batter is, right? And then he leans all the way back over and he's got a very, very long arm path. He's not your typical guy that he lands, the hands inside 90 degrees. I mean, this guy is fly out from the beginning. Okay. And it's interesting to see people's impressions of good versus bad mechanics. It took me back to the rocket science. We had all these high level grades, and they were all on our injured list. So I knew as a biomechanist, I was like, I can't go there anymore. It's the phys part, the actual functional strength. And then you look at Ohtani and you think like, wow, he just has a beautiful delivery. It's so strong. He holds positions, got direct line home plate. Now, one has had 3 Tommy John surgeries, right? The other has had 1, but Jared Weaver had 12 seasons of 30 plus starts. Shohei Ohtani is yet to hit that, and he may never, because of the expense. So the problem is, we talk about all the injuries, and I read about this constantly. There's always a new article that comes out in terms of a theory why athletes get hurt, but we don't talk about the arm. And I was part of a study with, I was a co-author with Lori Mishner. She's at USC. And she studied all the Angels' arm strength data in 2018 when we had the most injuries. And lo and behold, the North American pitcher has the weakest throwing arm in professional baseball, at least in our sample of 300 players. They're so big and their arms are so relatively weak. How can that not be a foundational reason why we have so many surgeries? And then multiply that with a shortened rest period, where neurologically you have less rest in a weaker arm. We have problems. It's not so much the pitch clock. It's that the arms are not at a capacity to handle it. They need to be trained for that. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, right? Yeah. So you're putting the bio back in biomechanics. It's not just mechanics, right?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great way to think of it. So when you're talking about doing the measurements on home and versus the road, and you're measuring basic strength, changes in basic measurements of strength, right? And is the idea right here that if something gets weak, you're going to get some sort of compensation pattern that's unhealthy, right?
Right.
That potentially causes injury.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the biggest thing, is that there is 3 factors we teach us in our course that are real strong determinants of injury. The first one are the physiologic factors. Okay. You got to start there too, because it's so brain related. And those things impact sleep, right? They do impact energetics, like how you're recovering, There's just so much there. And then the second one is coaching errors. Taking a player that has a certain like a set of motor preferences, altering them. We did that with the Angels. We altered their arm path
to fit your model.
Yeah. And they weren't capable of handling it. And the third, so these two, the physiologic and the coaching error, they hinge on altered metabolism. Okay. They're promoting, they either are not very good with energy sources. They might have high cortisol. They have all sorts of things that are occurring. But then the coaching element, you're having a body that is adapted to a certain strategy for years.
Yeah.
And now you're unraveling it. And now that athlete, right, is using muscles in a different way. Energetic costs go up. You're throwing them into a competition. Like the changes that are occurring in baseball are happening in season, where there's high levels of pressure. And now you get into that third rung, which is, the mechanical determinants of injury, because those two hinging on altered metabolism now affects the optimal variability in a player. And I know that's things that people are looking at, but now the loading may change and the micro damage increases. Okay. And the strength is dropping out. So it's not shielding the ligaments or tendons because the arm's weaker. It can't contract fast. And the fibers are dropping out that go over top of these structures. And as we progress further with this mechanical altered movement state, we lead ourselves to surgery. So, the linking piece is, okay, well, how do we know the altered neuromechanical state that's looking at actual maximum strength? You can't fudge that measure. If the arm is not functioning at a high level, and I try to make this analogy, if I squat 500 pounds and I only need 300 pounds to win a powerlifting competition, there's a certain neural load that I have to handle. But then if I take my squat max and I turn it into 1,000 pounds and I only need 300 to win, the percentage of that effort is less. So by us increasing the strength of the throwing arm significantly, the percentage of the neurological effort that's required in pitching is reduced.
Okay.
So, in the training errors are a problem too. We make a lot of training errors. We lead them into imbalances by working certain muscle groups and ignoring others.
Too much.
Yeah. And we're giving them so much volume. We're not gaining strength. It's focused on muscular endurance, and the athlete's already doing that by throwing. So there's all sorts of connections that are related to this big problem.
Yeah. So it's not just obviously just one simple thing. It's everything is an adaptation to pitch clock, pitch velocity, whatever you're talking about. It's whether sometimes I think our body's our own worst enemy, right? We'll adapt to almost anything you put us into, not always in a good way, right? We'll adapt ourselves into surgery if we don't have this correct foundations, to maintain performance over a short term. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Right? So you kind of have training programs that target each of these three pillars when you.
Well, yes.
More assessments.
These determinants are all hinging on the assessment of the throwing arm. Okay. For example, we look at consistent testing and we can determine the recovery of the throwing arm. So when we see an athlete has a recoverability issue, the first thing we do is we attack the psychophysiologic elements, because we know, hey, is there a sleep problem? Is there a some type of stress, that's preventing the throwing arm from recovering? I had an athlete at the big league level. He had a very stressful event. The day that it happened, he had a surgery. So there's a connection there, right? We have an altered state, even if it's acute. For that one game, losing 10 pounds of strength, a 10-pound dumbbell, they don't have the capacity, and it's a straw that breaks the camel's back. So the next are the coaching errors. And we have a course called the Certified Pitching Biomechanics course that lays out an algorithmic way to making a mechanical change.
Okay.
And you never want to make a biomechanical change on a player that's got a weak arm. You fix the arm. So if they don't have pain or poor performance, monitor, make sure the arm is healthy, because they'll sustain performance longer. Okay.
Yeah.
But then if you're starting to see an athlete might have pain or poor performance, especially in the poor performance side, fix the arm, because as I said, these altered movement states, even though we think this is the positive approach and the athlete's saying, yes, this feels better, neurologically, we don't know. You can't sense it like burning sensations like lactic acid.
Yeah.
It changes. So we got that covered by looking at strength. Now, the mechanical piece, okay, that's something for like someone who's very upper level, has access to looking at very high level motion data, because then you can look at things like, what is their stress shielding ratio? And I look at this as, what is the percentage of pounds, okay, over the miles per hour, or over the torque of the elbow. I'm really focused on the elbow. So what is the strength that can be produced in the baseball grip, which we test? And what is that relative to the torque applied? Are they strong enough to handle torque? And when the torque changes, how's strength changing? Intuitively, we know if my strength is going down and my torque is going up, we've lost stress shielding. We've lost the ability to handle that increased loading. So that's just another metric that connects all the arm strength data together.
Yeah. I like that. So you're looking at kind of multi-joint coordination, not just one isolated thing, like how your strength and torque relate to each other.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So you're measuring like grip strength on the ball.
Yeah.
As a function of torque?
It's kind of hard to see the sensor.
I can see it. Yeah.
But you wear this sensor. Okay. You wear it. We press into fixed surfaces forward, backward. We have a bunch of tests that look at different muscle groups posterior to the shoulder. But then what we do is we hold this thing like a baseball. Okay. And we put the athlete in a position to knock out every muscle other than the forearm muscle that gets targeted with these three fingers. It's called the flexor digitorum superficialis, long name, but it is anatomically pretty much the only muscle that goes directly over the UCL. And under ultrasound, when they've studied the ligament, okay, it is the only muscle when activated that truly has a reduction in the joint gap in the elbow. So it actually compresses the elbow. And this Tommy John situation is a tension-based injury. So we test that muscle for function. And if it loses, its strength properties, we need to make adjustments. We have another measure that people should really pay attention to. It's called the strength velocity ratio. Now, what people don't know, there's been a few studies, is that equivalent of like when you increase a mile per hour, you're increasing 1 unit of elbow torque. They're pretty linearly related. And so, you really want to make sure that as the athlete's gaining velocity, that their strength isn't coming down. And that happens. You can lose strength and you can gain velocity by increasing the elasticity. They become more hypermobile. That's been known in weighted ball training. An athlete can get a lot more layback and as a catapult, and they don't have the springs. So you're stretching stuff a lot, and it's a problem.
Is that kind of like equivalent to like a measure of movement efficiency, like or economy?
These
per,
are all
per unit output. How much do you generate?
Right. And Dr. Glenn Fleissig, if people have not, if they're listening and they've not read anything from him, I think you're living under a rock, because he is the most published person in the baseball biomechanics space.
For sure.
And I'm very grateful because he had me take a lead on a research manuscript that we had published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine on biomechanical efficiency, this concept of doing more with less. So what we did is we looked at the miles per hour that could be achieved, And we also looked at the relative torque that's applied to our pitchers. And it was interesting to see that professional pitchers are actually much more efficient than college pitchers, even though
Okay.
the velocity is the same.
Right. Yeah.
Just kind of interesting. So in some ways, we had a slight uptick of the velocity in the pro group, but we then did a multilinear regression. If people don't know what that means, we put different features in of kinematics, things that you could measure with stick diagrams in case people wanted to do it, that contribute to improving this biomechanical efficiency measure. I think we were almost at like 30%, which is a good amount
For sure.
to predict difference in this measure. And guess what? Like 90% of them are at the arm. The positioning of the arm, so it's really important. And that's where I come back to strength, is that if we have weakness in our throwing arms, it's going to change the position in terms of abduction, horizontal abduction, external rotation. It's going to, my elbow flexion and extension, those things at different time points are going to be altered. And that's going to reduce the biomechanical efficiency of the delivery. So that's a connection right there.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. The like that's a classic, in motor learning, sometimes your performance is flattening out, but you're still improving because you're getting more efficient. You're doing the same with less.
Right.
And it's hard to see that. It's hard to measure it unless you go about to do something like you're doing. Yeah.
Right.
That's really interesting. So for the strength exercise to strengthen obviously you mentioned some, but are there particular exercises that you kind of target for, or the particular like bands versus weights versus,
yes, that's a good question. So in the app, it takes the data, and it changes your training program based on metrics. We sell the best training bands, in my opinion, in the world. Through Crossover Symmetry, the companies are linked. Now, the bands can get up to 40 pounds at normal tension. And some of my high-level MLB guys, we stretch them out where they can be like 60 pounds for the shoulder. And the thing is that you need a combination. Elastic resistance, it doesn't have the same inertia. You're going to have tension constantly in your motion, depending on how far back you are. If I'm doing dumbbell work, what happens, like especially even cuff weights, I see this a lot. You get to a certain place in your movement where you're not mechanically disadvantaged anymore, and just the motion of the weight just pulls your arm into position. You actually can lose activation. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make, that's why I love the band so much, is they don't use grip. And it's been proven in science that maximum grip force handles can actually turn down large muscles like my pecs, my lats, my upper trap, and it can increase the activation of my smaller muscles, especially the forearm strength, because I'm gripping, which, you build capacity there, but it also turns up the lower trap, and it also turns up what's called the infraspinatus. It's a posterior rotator cuff that a lot of people have problems with. A lot of our young kids, they're very strong in the front and they're very weak at the back. So if I don't do a thing, if I'm using bands without grip and I'm not gripping, that athlete is actually not getting enough juice squeezed per rep. So that's a big piece. And then you do have to train the whole body, the proximal body, your trunk stability, your lower body. But I always start the programming focusing on the top down. How do I get the athlete from fingertip to shoulder really strong? First, and not making it as an add-on. A lot of players, they do their training for their arm at the end. They deprioritize arm strength. So they go through this whole upper body day, and then they're really tired. They don't get a lot, out of their arm care. And some of them, I remember in pro ball, if you put it as a finisher exercise in our electronic platform, a lot of guys were walking out the door. They didn't think it was that important. They'd rather want to squat.
It's like stretching, right?
You don't see the priority. So if we put it at the top, we make it data led and we make it really challenging. Now the guys go like, holy, I got to save my energy for this. This doesn't belong at the bottom when I'm doing such intense exercise for my upper extremity.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, right? Yeah. So I have a question here. So with do you have any kind of management of a load with throwing that you kind of work in with is this based on your measurements too? Do you kind of recommend
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
management workload? Yeah.
Intuitively, like we have something called the Throw Fuzz Velocity Enhancement Checklist. Like we indicate how athletes can opt in. And a lot of the times we're seeing a lot of these injuries coming from velocity enhancement. The athlete's arms get weaker because they're letting go of the ball, and they're getting more loose because, you put a heavy ball in someone's hand, it's going to stretch them more. So they have an altered length tension relationship. So what we do is when you profile strength, when that athlete has to be removed. Intuitively, hey, I got a weighted ball day today. I'm testing before the training. And if I know, he's got a bad shoulder imbalance today. He's really weak at the back. We don't want to put an athlete on a high octane program with that arm. Or, the other thing we do is we test the strength afterwards.
Yes.
So we do a post exam to see how fatigable were they during this training. And we could start to window in what is the optimal amount for them next time. We don't want to keep, I see like throwing programs, they should not be programmed like classical periodization. For people that don't know this, is that classical periodization, you're doing muscular endurance, so it's light and you do a lot of reps, and then it starts to go to hypertrophy where you start narrowing in the reps, increasing the intensity. As you get to the higher intensities, you're really basically doing less reps, and it's really hard. The program has to be like a wave loading. You got a high day, you got low days coming after it. You got high days and low days to recover, but you also have to streamline those fluctuations. You have to be able to say, you know what? We need a deload day, or he doesn't even throw. We can't throw for a couple days. His arm's really fatigued. He's losing more than 20 pounds of arm strength. After these sessions, we got to build capacity so that doesn't happen, and then they become safer.
Okay. I like that. So kind of data driven and have flexibility and not just writing a whole program out
Exactly
and following it religiously. Yeah. No, that's it. So you're measuring you're measuring strength in a lot of the grip. And as you mentioned, doing a lot of these different strength measurements and seeing how they change before and after and getting a baseline that's kind of with your sensor.
Yeah, we want to make a habit. And I always say to athletes, really do your best to train test twice a week. You want to do a fresh exam on your hardest throwing days, and you want to do a post exam after them. So you're looking at, bullpens, throwing days where you have really heavy pull downs. For what people might not know what that is that you're at an extended distance and you're trying to throw it on a line as hard as possible. Sometimes you get a really far run and you're trying to gun those things. So that's a high intensity day. Also with weighted balls and games, you got a lot of options to do your testing. And you don't want gaps. If you're a reliever, I really recommend like every 48 hours to test, because you're probably going to be up. If you think you're going to go back to back, test the next day, because you're going to inform your coach, hey, I'm good to go. Or you can say, my arm ain't looking good today. And as a coach, you got to understand the pain of sacrifice to not have pain of disappointment. If you put an athlete in, and this is what happens with an arm that isn't recovered, and they get hurt and they are a frontline reliever, you're in trouble, especially now in the pro game, because your starters don't go more than 5 innings or 3 looks through the order.
A lot of them.
You burn out a reliever, that's your season. If it's a closer, that you really need to convert on wins. So, you got to have a good structured monitoring process to be successful, I think, in the game.
This is really great. I really like this. Reminds me in a completely different way. So I run, and this reminds me of, like, we've been running for a lot of time, like heart rate training. Like, you measure your heart rate as a function of your pace.
Yep.
Pace is a function related to your heart rate. That's the efficiency. And then it gives you how much did it drop? How much did it quickly to recover? How many hours do you need off before you go again? The same kind of thing, putting this kind of individualized, targeted training metric. And then you bring in your sleep and your other data, and you can taking a look, have a holistic view of it. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's the the analogy, so if there are runners listening to this, the running economy
Yeah.
and that what we're looking at is like throwing economy.
I mean, kind of.
The inputs, like what you're saying, that's affecting your output,
Yeah.
and it's like you have these process influencers like your sleep, your hydration, nutrition, your stress,
Hmm.
your training programs. And then now you have your process metric, which I believe is your strength testing. This is the
Hmm.
hinging factor that then affects your throwing economy, how much you can handle, how frequent you can get out there and pitch. It hinges on those layers. But the sad thing is there's a lot. We got 40,000 athletes testing. It's a
Hmm.
speck of dirt when there's 16 million of them,
Yeah.
in this country, and 5% of all pitchers in this country have surgery. There's billions and billions and billions of dollars being spent at surgeries.
Hmm.
Some of these places, even in the Northeast, are doing over almost 150 surgeries a year.
Yeah.
And you think like that's $30,000 to $40,000 with physical therapy and everything else as a medical
Hmm.
burden. It's a problem,
Yeah.
and people need to understand what is their throwing economy. How can they improve it? How can we individualize the pitch count standards? You and me, Rob, if
Yeah.
we're the same age and the same team, we have the same daily maximum,
Yeah.
but
For
you might have
sure.
had staples in your shoulder, right? I might have had 2 Tommy John surgeries. And I got another teammate that's completely healthy, but he also has a daily max of 105 pitches at
Yeah.
18.
For sure.
We got to figure it out.
Yeah. For
Right.
sure. Have it more individualized and yeah, targeted for. And I guess the other kind of like I think the reason you target strength too is right. Any kind of changes in performance or pain are probably going to be too late, right? They're not going to be very reliable signals
No,
to
well,
detect
no, yeah.
these kind of things. Your velocity is going to drop after there's already probably a big problem there. So if
Yep.
you're just measuring performance or even changes in mechanics, it's kind of that's outside looking at trying to identify what's going on inside from the outside is challenging.
Yeah, the first
Yeah.
thing I look at, so we talked about biomechanical
Mhm.
efficiency, but in our course we talk about another efficiency metric, which is pitch efficiency. How many pitches are thrown per inning?
Yeah.
Or you can create another metric of looking at how many pitches are thrown per plate appearance. Athletes that you start seeing are throwing more balls, right?
Mhm.
They're losing accuracy. And this has been shown in research that a big piece is shoulder position,
Mhm.
and elbow position, again, going to the arm. Before you see a velocity change, I believe you look more at accuracy measures because
Okay.
they're telling you that they're losing a lot of the motor control, the fine movement motor control of where the arm has to be. There's instances when I release a ball, my arm is stopped,
Mhm.
for a second. It like the
Yeah.
velocity, it has to apply friction to the ball. When I'm going into maximum layback, there's a point in which you can't make a slope on a position time curve where it is isometric, it's co-contracted. The
Mhm.
players that have problems is when they have more speed near the layback position. They're not managing this catapult, analogy again puts more stress on the elbow. So, we definitely have to have a process, even with all the high end data that a lot of pro teams and college teams had to say, there's been a change either in extension, they've been, something in horizontal release if they haven't moved the player along the mound, release height,
Right.
and what the results are. Sometimes pitchers, it could be as simple as reducing their chase percentages. The pitchers are becoming way too easy. And the
Yeah.
balls that they're trying to throw
Pick
at a
up.
zone for pitches, they're taking, and
Yeah.
that's something that you gotta look at and say, okay, could this overuse risk be increasing?
Mhm.
And even with little young kids, I remember when I was probably 11, maybe no, I was a little younger, maybe 9, when I started in Canada, we
Mhm.
we had to throw to our own team. You were not allowed to, as a pitcher, you were not competing against the other team because the league was focused on you learning how to throw strikes first. So I
Okay.
remember I did not want to throw at maximum capacity as a kid I wanted to make sure that my hitters
You threw
on
it
my
good.
team could hit me. So
Mhm.
at a young age, I was able to work on how to throw strikes.
Yeah.
But
That
now, the issue is now, we're trying to increase the velocity, and we're losing that aim small, miss small. There's generally a big net or a wall that's not targeted, and
Mhm.
so that pitch efficiency, if I gain velocity, I might, the speed accuracy trade-off,
Yeah.
I might actually lose accuracy. So
Yeah,
that's got to be narrowed in.
for sure. Yeah. So, well, speaking of kids, does your program, do you have programs for young pitchers as well?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The
Yeah.
the the youth market it's a big deal because they need to learn these habits early.
Okay.
And um, one of the big things, at least I'm going to be doing some stuff with USA Baseball. The
Okay.
director has talked to me about coming in and helping the team as a pitching coordinator with their 13 and 14-year-olds.
Mhm.
But to start to develop the right habits, taking care of their arms, doing the right thing. But even more so, we got to start when they pick up a ball. Like my son's 6 years old, and he's carrying heavy things. A lot of kids they're on their parents' phones, or they're watching TV, and they got a very rounded back position, really short here, and putting them in programming to start to develop the right anatomical stability,
Mhm.
I think is essential for the future health of athletes. And a lot of parents are like, I don't know if my kid's ready. I'm going to wait till he's good. Right
Yeah.
now, the kid's 15 and we got a whole host of problems. So that's key.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So, is there, so do you do the same kind of strength training testing and stuff with kids, or?
Yes, yes. The
Yeah. Okay.
testing, the testing's all the same.
Okay.
And in the world of at least the sports science as it relates to biomechanics, we normalize it. And what people might not know is we look at a relative measure to
Mhm.
an athlete's body
Body.
size.
Mhm.
And that allows us to know how strong are they relative to the gain in their body weight.
Yeah.
But also we can compare between players of different ages, even,
Yeah.
to look at, how a 10-year-old would compare to a 12-year-old, and what is the trajectory. On LinkedIn, we put a lot out on younger players, but we show how their velocity increases are linearly occurring with
Mhm.
increases in relative strength.
Okay.
Where most of the world is velocities going up, and it's opposite. The strength's going down. It's not timing well, because the
Yeah.
athlete is getting too big too quickly. A lot of athletes can bulk up, especially at the age of 16, a lot
Mhm.
easier than they're gaining arm strength. And so we got to change that. We have to change that process of the bigger, faster, stronger, and have the arm be prioritized so
Mhm.
that the athletes are gaining more arm strength per pound of body weight. It'll be
Mhm.
much safer around here.
For sure. And you mentioned that finding you had where you found the different cultures. The person with have kind of different, and we're the worst. North America's the worst. What are the key factors in that? Is that just growth rate, differences in growth
Yeah.
rate? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like
People getting bigger, faster, and
yeah,
easier, and not can't
these
have.
kids, it's
Yeah.
amazing. So what people don't know is that from the time an athlete generally gets drafted, okay, in pro
Mhm.
ball, they gain roughly 25 to 30 pounds,
Mhm.
okay, from 18 and up, and until the age of about 22 or 23, you see very sharp rises in velocity. Okay, they
Right.
start losing elasticity. And so the issue is you got the body size increasing, you got the velocity ramping up in this early stage of weight gain, rapid weight gain, but the arm isn't catching up.
Right.
And that's where we got to manage the throwing workloads. And we gotta focus on where, like I said, if you're a strength coach, prioritizing either putting arm care in each complex of your lifts. Like you might do a deadlift, you might do two pulls, like a deadlift, you do a row, and then you're doing something for external rotation. But it's early on, so it tells the athlete this is important. We're going to put a lot of emphasis and effort there, so that you don't really skimp out at the end and not get anything out of it.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And so for kids, do you want them to take a period off from throwing, like
So
extended periods? What's your thoughts on?
yeah, like for me, I always stress that at least to the age of 16, try to play as many sports as you can. You know, a
Hmm.
lot of, at least in
Yeah.
my consulting business, that I also have more of a comprehensive program.
Hmm.
I have a lot of multi-sport athletes, so I have to design programs for basketball players and
Yeah.
baseball players, soccer players and baseball players. Sometimes I got a dual overhand. I got a tennis guy and a baseball guy.
Hmm.
So that's something to really stress as well, is that the multi-sport approach and
Yeah.
training for that is very important. And that off season, that means that you got to really reduce the throwing.
Hmm.
But then as they get really hyper focused on baseball, around 16, 17, kids are preparing for the draft or they're looking for a college scholarship. And now it's baseball all the time. You got to at least take 2 weeks off,
Yeah.
where you're focusing on strength. But if you have the sensor, you can determine
Right. I was
when you're
gonna
ready
say.
to throw. But the,
Yeah.
the process, you don't want something when you're at focus like that and at baseball, and you're not picking up a ball until February and the season starts in March. It's too much throwing in such a concentrated time. So you have to work backwards, and you have
Hmm.
to give it a little bit of, you got to feed it a little bit. Maybe you throw twice a week and with big
Hmm.
breaks between, or you go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then you add days systematically and distances and intensities, and you use data to go up and
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
You're gonna produce an arm that's going to be ready for competition. A lot of injuries that are happening in baseball, they happen in the first 2 months.
For sure. Yeah. We
You
saw this
know,
year.
it's
Yeah.
just like shock.
Yeah. From nothing. Yeah.
Yeah,
To
like
full out, full throttle in a really short period. Yeah. No, and obviously I agree. The diversification of sports is beneficial for so many reasons other
yeah,
than your arm strength, your mental health and all these other things.
sure.
So it's just
New
great. Yeah.
teammates, so the
Yeah.
social piece. I mean, there's studies. If there's parents out there, there's just so much out there on the multi-sport athlete. I have a review paper with another Canadian guy. His name's Adam Ballin at Centennial College. He runs their health promotions programs. But we did a pretty deep dive on early sports specialization, like why these youth injuries are happening. We started to highlight some of these fundamental training programs that are super important, but there is a connection between early specialization and future injury. I mean, you
Hmm.
just got so much overuse, that's a problem. I mean, I played volleyball and baseball in college, so two overhand sports, but much different. And I played basketball all the way through high school, so three sports. I was able to, it was actually better for me.
Hmm.
And another secret that I'll tell people, when I was at the Angels, there was a section on multi-sport, and we graded pitchers' sport involvement. So it's like, okay, this guy is a pitcher that throws 100, can touch 100, he plays golf, versus this pitcher that throws 100 and he's got a football background,
Yeah.
right? There's two different athletes,
Very
and we're
good. Yeah.
trying to think of which one's more ready-made and which one might have the grit, or these are important. People are looking for that now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Broader, more holistic, if you want to use a
Yeah, yeah.
buzzword approach, right? And then just looking at what they can do on a baseball field. Yeah. No, that's really interesting, right? Yeah, I think that's a good message to send. And so what about kind of velocity, this push towards velocity and throwing? I know a lot like throwing close to your max. Is there a way that you kind of assess that or think about that
Well, yeah,
as
I
a risk
mean,
factor?
there's so much data to look at that now, and I think
Yeah.
every 10-year-old's father has a radar gun.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Yeah.
easy to get the velocity information. You look at you look at the sustained velocity.
Mhm.
The kid throws hard. Is it early in the game and there's a dip, or you have some athletes that have an
Yeah,
inflection point
for sure.
where second or third inning they start to increase, right? And
Mhm.
then you have guys who are stable.
Mhm.
You want the stable pitcher. You don't want big swings.
Yeah.
And the thing is again, paying attention to these strength metrics. Can I get my strength velocity ratio higher? That means that I'm very strong. My pounds per miles per hour of arm strength is very high. So that means that I have, like I gave you the analogy on powerlifting, is that my relative percentage effort can be managed more because I have this huge reserve. And then I don't have to rely so much on just stretching. I have stretch shortening. So it's just not my passive tissues like my capsule or my ligaments that are having to stretch. It's contraction. So that's really helpful with velocity enhancement. But the whole thing too is velocity is also a piece, and the health and velocity by planning recovery. When people design programs, the first thing that the performance specialist, whether it's a pitching performance specialist or strength performance specialist, is you have to determine where are your recovery days. For example, in a high intensity weighted ball program, for me, with the way we write programs in our education at armcare.com, is that Tuesdays and Fridays are your best days. You have 72 hours recovery pretty much. And then Mondays you're throwing a little bit so that the athlete, it's not a shock, to the hard throwing day. And then you got the weekends off. And then in between you have some basic level throwing to reduce contractures, which is tightening of the joints. But you're using the data to determine, hey, Friday's coming. It's our hardest day. We got the weekend off, but my guy's arm didn't recover very well from Tuesday. That's it. Then I know this is going to be a lighter day to recover, and we're going to go and give him almost a week to get ready again for Tuesday and make it safer,
For sure. Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to think about it. I think, you're not going to get the training benefits anyway. You just when they're in that state. So
right.
You're so no, I think that's really good. So Ryan, where can people find out more about all this?
Well,
if
yeah,
they're interested in finding about your what services you offer. And
well, on armcare.com, on that website, we have over 150 articles, and on YouTube.
I know you've done some research yourself, so you're not just talking about it.
On YouTube, there's roughly 60 hours of free education.
Okay.
So we have also 33 hours of electronic courses that are for high-level certifications that are 10 hours a piece, to small mini courses to teach people how to make data-led throwing programs. For me, LinkedIn's the best, especially like if you have athletes that have had injuries. That's kind of my wheelhouse. I really want to target serving athletes with injuries and creating a durability process for them. That's the best way to find me as a consultant is on LinkedIn. For someone who's interested. I got there was a kid that reached out to me with 10 years old facing Tommy John surgery. Okay, 10 years old, which is a shame. And so like one of the things I do, because I'm connected with a lot of MLB surgeons, is getting a difference of opinion. And if that athlete had gone through with this with an immature elbow, that could have been a nightmare, in the future. So, those kinds of things, they come up, and I get really, I get worried for parents who they don't have the resources to dive deep into what makes sense. When should it be conservative? What should I be doing with surgery? Those are things that I want to fill those needs.
Yeah. I like your data-driven, approach to giving you some logic to all of this. I think it's really nice. Yeah. So that's the best place for people to look at. Okay. Yeah. And I've looked at through your materials and your program. It's really good. And it is really affordable and a great opportunity for a lot of people. I like how you've done that. Very passionate about keeping people's arms healthy and strong. So I appreciate that. So thanks for joining me, Ryan. That was great. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know you do an amazing job, and it's really vast. You've been doing this for a while, so I'm grateful that I'm a guest. I appreciate that.
Okay, I'm just going to end this.